Hello and welcome to our video about diphthongs and the Are Colored Schwa. Today I'll be using my computer as the blackboard to be able to teach this lesson. So let's get started. What we have right here is the vowel chart, just like you know it. So we have high, mid, and low, and we have front, central, and back. It's the same thing. The only thing that I'm not having different is the division between tense and lax, okay? But we're not going to use that right now, but you already know this, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk about this. We're going to start off today. Before we look at the diphthongs, I want to look at something called off glides. We've already seen off glides, and the off glides are these. So you have the off glides, which is the E, U, A, and O. It's the four tense pure vowels that we've called them so far. Now, the difference is, like for example, we've already talked about this in class. We've seen that when we have the tense vowel in the IPA, in the regular IPA, instead of having the E, you just have E, right? And the U in the IPA, in a dictionary, you might just find U. And the O might look like O, or it might look, if it's British pronunciation, it might look like O. And the A you may find as A. So why did Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich decide to use two symbols instead of one? Well, it turns out that these are longer. Like for example, if you compare the tense and the lax, usually the tense is a longer sound, while the lax is a shorter sound. So they use two symbols to make emphasis on the fact that there is a difference in length of the vowel. But also because there is tongue movement. There is a little bit more tongue movement than the regular vowels. And they decided to use a glide. That's why they call it the off glides. Basically, a vowel and a glide, all right? In some dictionaries or in some explanations that you can see in YouTube, you can find the A and the O, they sometimes call them diphthongs, because what a diphthong is when you have two vowel sounds that are joined together in one syllable. So it's just within the syllable, you have those two sounds that are together that you really can't separate, and they just go together. So like the letter A, the letter in the alphabet A is just one letter, one sound, even though for Spanish speakers, it sounds like it's two sounds. It sounds like it's E plus E. We've talked about this before. So that's why, because it's A plus E, that's why some people say that this is a diphthong, because there's that, it starts off in one place and finishes in the other. In other words, I could say that it starts off here in this box and it goes up to this box because it goes from A, E, A. So the jaw closes, A, and the tongue moves upward, A. The exact same thing happens with O, because you have the O plus the U sound, and you start O, O, but it all happens in the back. So you start in this box and you actually finish in this box. And that's why sometimes people call these diphthongs. However, Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich decided not to call these diphthongs, but to call them off glides, because the movement of the tongue and the movement of the jaw happens, but it's very slight as compared to the diphthongs. So then, now what would a diphthong be? All right, let's talk about diphthongs. So a diphthong is basically, again, two sounds coming together where the starting sound starts off in one of these boxes, and then the ending sound ends up in another box. But in a diphthong, as opposed to an off glide, there's much more tongue movement. Instead of just moving a little bit, it moves a lot. So for example, instead of just going from one box to the next, it's actually traversing many more boxes. An example of this would be oi. So the oi diphthong starts off right here. It starts off in o, but it moves all the way over to this box to end up in e. So it's oi. So it doesn't only close the jaw, but also moves the tongue from the back to the front. There is a lot more tongue movement than an off glide. And it's also a little bit lengthier than a regular vowel. So the fact that we're using two symbols doesn't only look at the fact that it's longer, but also that there's this movement of the jaw on the tongue, and there's more movement than an off glide. In the same example, the other two diphthongs are I. Again, it starts all the way over here, and it goes I all the way up here. And then also you have ow, which starts all the way at the bottom as a central back, and goes up to the oo. And this is the reason why diphthongs are considered two separate sounds that are joined into one, that can't really be separated, but they start off in one vowel and they end up in another vowel. So how do we go about describing these sounds? All right, well, it's not that difficult. When we describe vowels in general, we use height, frontness, backness, tenseness, laxness, and roundness. But in this case, we're just using the starting position and the ending position. So we're going to say that, for example, if we're going to take oi, which starts here in this box, we consider this box to be mid-back, right? And it's going in this direction into this box, which we consider high front. So oi can be described as mid-back to high front. It's the mid-back to high front diphthong. And that's all I need to describe. Let's take this other one. So let's take I. And again, we're starting in this box, which is central back, right? So we're going from central back all the way to high front. So how would you call this diphthong? You would call it low central back to high front. And if we're going to use this one, which is going from this box all the way to this box right here, we're going to low central back all the way up to high back. So that's what we would call it, low central back to high back. And that's how you would describe a diphthong. Now, let's use these diphthongs in some examples so that we can understand this better. So the diphthong oi, you have sounds like boy, like noise, and like hoist. Usually the diphthong oi is used or spelled with oy or oi, and it's just transcribed like this. In a dictionary in the IPA, you would probably find boy, and it's the exact same sound. There is no difference. It's just a different way of looking at it, using regular vowels instead of glides as vowels. The diphthong I is the sound in die, and if you read this, it may get a little bit confusing because this is the pronunciation for this, right? So don't read this as letters. Read it as if you were going to read Spanish. So for example, if you were to read this in Spanish, it says die. And that's exactly what this word is. Same thing here. If you read this in Spanish, and that's maybe a good mnemonic tip, this says size, which is this word right here. And then you have other spellings, for example, and it says buy, right? So the other diphthong is ow, and again, it's not how it's spelled, but it's how it sounds. And the best way to explain how it sounds is looking at the Spanish. So ow is like cow, like Ow in drought, different spelling, and also a different spelling, like in house. And if you follow that rule that you're actually reading a sound, it's going to be easy. You don't want to get confused because this spelling sounds different. It's another sound. So don't think of this as a spelling, but rather a sound. Okay? So that's pretty much it for the diphthongs, except for the fact that there are diphthongs in the IPA and they look like this. That's pretty much the only difference. It's the exact same thing, like I said before, but it's a different way of looking at them. This is how Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich look at it, and this is how the regular IPA or a dictionary you will find it in. That's how you'll see it. And let's talk about the Are Colored Schwa, which is also in your book, which is also part of the readings that you've had to do. And the Are Colored Schwa is actually very, very simple. And probably the easiest way to look at it is if we look at some examples. What happens with the Are Colored Schwa is that you have these two sounds that are coming together and they can't separate from each other. The schwa and the r just get together and you cannot distinguish where one starts and the other ends. If we look at some examples for the Are Colored Schwa, you have, for example, learn. If I were to say, cut the schwa out and just read this, it says learn, because you can't really distinguish where the schwa ends and where the r begins. They're just meshed up together and you can't really separate one from the other. Another example of this would be her. Again, what happens if we do this? We would have, if we just say that, her. That's exactly what the Are Colored Schwa sounds like. It sounds like it's just an R. However, this doesn't work and this doesn't work because you need a vowel when you're using that syllable. So you have one syllable, you need one vowel. What would be the vowel? So this naturally turns into her. And this would definitely turn into learn, because you're adding that vowel so that it makes sense when you read it. Another example of this would be bird. Again, the same thing. What happens if I take this out? Nothing, but you need that vowel in order for it to be a syllable. Another one, you have it right here, doctor. It sounds just like an R, but the schwa is still there. And then purse. So the problem with the Are Colored Schwa could be that there is no spelling that defines. It could be E-R, E-A-R, I-R, O-R, U-R. There is no specific way to spell it, but it happens and it occurs everywhere, like the word occur. And there's other things that you can find in the dictionary as well. When we look at the schwa, let's look at the schwa and the tent, or the schwa and the stressed schwa, which is this that we have right here, like in the word hunting. In the previous week, the videos, we talked about this sound, and we talked that this is, in terms of sound, sounds very much like the schwa, but the only difference is that if this is the stressed syllable, instead of a schwa, you would use that, the tent. I call it the tent. It looks like a teepee. So if we look at the schwa occurs in unstressed syllable. So for example, you have staple. This is the stressed syllable. This is the unstressed syllable. So what we're doing right now is, when we look at the unstressed syllable, you would use a schwa instead of a tent, right? A perfect example of this is the word uncle. You have stressed syllable, and then you have unstressed syllable, and this is a tent, and this is a schwa, because this is the stressed syllable, and this is the unstressed syllable. If we were to take the Are Colored Schwa and it is stressed, in some dictionaries, you will find it as that. So it's that sound. It's like, for example, the stressed schwa plus the R, and that's the symbol. It's like a little 3 with a little tail there with a hook. And if you look at it, it occurs like that. That says purple. It can be a little bit confusing, and that's why Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich decided to keep it simple and then just do the Are Colored Schwa, which stands the same. And many books also use the Are Colored Schwa just like that, instead of having this other symbol that includes the tens schwa and the R. Another example of this would be personal. Personal, so you have that one right there. But again, Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich and a lot of other books just use the schwa and the R. Besides, it's a lot easier reading this, purple, than reading that, because you have to imagine that there's an R right here, which is not really there, whereas you have an R right there, and it makes a little bit more sense to read. Same here, right? And now some dictionaries also use this other version for the schwa R, but this is unstressed. So we've established that this is stressed, right? This is stressed. It occurs only in stressed syllables. This is unstressed, and this is unstressed. So for example, right here, after, this is called the hooked schwa, because it's the schwa and a little hook, a little tail or something like that. And it's supposed to symbolize an R. So that's So if you look at after, that's how you would write after, and that's how you would find it in some dictionaries, the traditional IPA. But Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich, they've decided to keep using the schwa R, and a lot of other authors as well. So it doesn't really matter what you use. So for example, if it's forget, the stressed syllable is get, forget. And you have forget. Same here, you have forget, as you can see it and you can find it in our book, and again, a whole bunch of other textbooks that you can find. So in a word like surgery, you have the stress and the unstressed version of these, but our book uses the same for both. In other words, according to our book, and going back to the original chart, according to a book, this sound right there is both stressed and unstressed. And it sounds like an R, but it stands for a vowel, a schwa and an R, like in the word purple, surgery, and all the others that we've seen. So I hope that this makes a little bit more sense when looking at the Are Colored Schwa. And I hope you're ready for your next dictation. See you next class.